see what feels a yes for you. And then you can go, hey, now I'm going to go study this, or now I want to volunteer my time here. Because I think if we took the pressure off this knowing and this success and this, like, you must get a degree, and then you've got to buy your first house, and then you've got to get a car, and then this treadmill that we get thrown onto is, we know in our it's not working. Like, think of the rate of mental health issues. Think of the stress you guys would see in people's bodies. We know it's not working. How could we do it differently, right? And for me, I think if we took that pressure off and went, hey, these first part of your life is about exploring. It's about figuring out who you are. It's about trying lots of different things. It's about really being able to tune into yourself to go, what kind of human do I want to be in the world, right? I think we would have very different outcomes.
Welcome to the Performance Initiative Podcast.
Our goal is to provide you and ourselves with the tools to be the best versions of ourselves.
We are your hosts, Dr. Grant Cooper
and Dr. Zinovy Meyler. We just wrapped up a conversation with Lael Stone.
We pose questions such as, how do you raise resilient children?
Should you punish your children?
What do you do if your teenager sneaks out in the middle of the night to go to a party?
Or how do you deal with a tantrum at the table?
And a lot of other interesting questions. And there's no one better to talk to you about this than Lael Stone. She is an Australian speaker, an educator, an author. She helped start her own school for children. She's just a wealth of knowledge. She has 3 kids of her own, and she was a lot of fun to speak with. I hope we have her back when we do this again. We had a whole list of questions, and we only got through a few because there was so much to talk about.
Absolutely. She was great in the conversation. To some extent, it was a very insightful conversation. And in other ways, it was almost like a therapy session.
It was that. We think you'll enjoy this one.
Lael, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. We have listened to you speak, and something occurred independently to both of us, actually. Grant and I are both fans of Cesar Millan. And if you don't know, Cesar is a celebrity dog trainer, but he always says, I don't train dogs, I train owners.
Right. And when you talk about raising children, you talk about training the parents. So what we wanted to ask you first and foremost is, from the parent perspective, like, what are your thoughts on using a harness versus neck leashes for small children? I'm sorry. Just kidding. Just totally kidding. Sorry. No, what we wanted to ask you was, when we want to raise resilient and happy, well-adjusted children, why should the focus be on the parents and their mental health first and foremost?
Yeah, so great question. I didn't know where you're going there for a second. I thought, okay.
What kind of medicine do they practice in America?
Okay. Look, I think it's a great question. And I always come back to, firstly, children are always responding to their environment. So, I really do believe, after working with families for 20 years, a child's natural state is to want to be connected to their parents, is to want to feel safe, secure, all those kind of things. And us as adults, we're always doing the best job we know how. The biggest thing about being a parent is we come to parenting with our own kind of backpack full of stories from how we were raised. And many, many parents I work with often say, I'm never going to do it how my dad did it, or I don't want to be like my mom. And if we don't often take the time to kind of explore our own stories, our mental health, all that kind of stuff, we will often default to being like them, or we will swing too far in the other direction to try and overcompensate. And we don't kind of have that beautiful grounded middle balance. So for me, always, whenever a parent comes to me with, I've got a problem with my 4-year-old or a problem with my 15-year-old, I'm like, okay, tell me about what they're doing, but let's start with you, because children are always responding to their environment, and there's always a reason for their behavior. And so I think we have to start with the parents and go, all right, what is happening for you when your child responds this way? What do we think is going on in your child's environment? What are they trying to tell you? I think parenting is a lot like decoding a bit of a mystery sometimes. We're having to really figure out what exactly is going on underneath what's being presented. And for me, I think, again, we know that we can be good parents when we have enough sleep, when there's money in the bank, when we're not stressed about work, we're not taking care of an elderly parent, we feel well in our bodies. It's easier to be a fun, playful parent when we've got all our needs met. It's when we are stressed and we're worried and we've got all the balls in the air, and, it's then that we often are very reactive. We can get really controlling. It's often then when our own wounds and shadows come up. So parenting requires a whole lot of support, I think, for the parent first, for their mental health, for their physical well-being, so that we can be the kind of best parent we can be. So I think we always, it's a bit like the aeroplane analogy. You got to put the face mask on first in order
Hmm.
to help the person next to you. And for me, that's how I see parenting as well.
It's something that occurred to us as we were talking about this, getting ready to talk to you, and we were talking about that idea of imprinting and how it's so important to work out your own issues before, for all the reasons you just said. And at the same time, sometimes there are issues that you can't work out or that you don't have time to work out, or how do you deal with that? How do you can have the introspection to be aware that, gee, I'm too reactive. I'm too this. I had this problem in my childhood. How do you sort of allow for that and not let that affect your kids? Or are the kids just doomed to repeat those kinds of, is that cycle just doomed to repeat itself because of that?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is we can't like tick off every box of, oh, what's that trauma and what's that trauma and how do I behave that way? There is no checklist that I'll just work through all the possible issues and then we'll have kids and then we'll be the
Right.
perfect parent.
Right.
Because actually there is no perfect parent. There is no perfect. Even if we try and do everything right, we're sometimes going to mess it up because we're humans. And we cannot parent in a way that's perfect so that our children never have any adversity or never have to struggle or never have anxiety or any of those things. Being a human is hard, right? And we are always going to rub up against stuff that feels tricky. Our kids are not going to get picked in the basketball team and they're going to have a friend who doesn't want to talk to them and they are going to get their heart broken. And our job as a parent is not to make sure that nothing bad happens to our kids, is to prepare our children to know how to navigate the hard stuff. So when we bring it back to, well, what work can we do on ourselves? I mean, I think it's really important that we are conscious of the places where we get triggered. And the best ways to figure that out is either by being in relationship with someone intimately, so partner, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it looks like, because they are a beautiful mirror of where we get, triggered. So just be in relationship with someone and you'll figure out where your wounds are. Or have children who are like the perfect mirror for all your stuff, really. And I often say that is that if you want to really understand, what sits there for you, have a child, right? And then try and raise them consciously because,
Right.
you could go meditate on a mountain for 10 years to find enlightenment or just try and raise your kids consciously, right? Because that is going to teach you more about yourself because our kids, they come along and they kind of go, hey, mom, dad, grandparent, whoever it is, my deep desire is to be to be who I really want to be in the world. Now, because we kind of come with all our own baggage, what we often do is we often project our unconscious stuff onto our kids, and then our kids go, hey, I don't want to carry that, so they push back on stuff and it pushes our buttons. And hopefully what the kids are saying is, can you please work on all your own stuff
Hmm.
so that you don't project it onto me, so that I'm free to be who I need to be? Because that's really the deep desire of all of us as humans. Can I be my authentic self? Now, again, because we kind of come with our own stories, whether that's, we grew up in a family where there was this expectation that, you're only good enough if you succeed. You're only good enough if you get the best marks, you go to college or university, you get a degree, you get a high paying job. There is a subtle message for a lot of people that then we will approve of you, or then we will love you if we do
Hmm.
that. Or we have to look a certain way in order to be approved of. Or we have to be a good boy or a good girl, and then we will approve of you. And so for a lot of us, we are born into families, and it's all very well meaning. Our parents do it because they love us. They're not doing it because I want to make your life hard. Well, sometimes that is the case, but what they are doing is saying, I love you and I want you to have a great life. But often these pressure or these imprints that we are often imprinted with, we carry forward with us. And then we have this belief system that I am only okay if I live up to this expectation. So the challenge of that then is that we spend most of our life living for this expectation that actually is not going to give us what we deeply want. Because really, at the end of the day, it is about knowing that we are enough just the way we are. So when we come back to doing our own work, becoming parents, I often say the biggest job is just to constantly be curious as to what surfaces for you and what feels out of balance within you. So that if your toddler, refuses to get in the bath, or, your teenager keeps talking back, and we start to get angry and we start to get frustrated, well, then it's an invitation to go, what is going on for me here? Because in an ideal world, when we are centered and we are calm, we can meet our kids' big feelings, with that real spaciousness and presence to be like, I can see there's something going on for you and I can help you navigate this. But when we get reactive and we get really charged with it, then I often say there's always an invitation for us to look at what's happening for me here and what am I making this mean in those moments.
Right. I guess in a way that's true for all of our interactions in life, but just more true with kids, right? It becomes more, the consequences are greater when we think about our children.
Yeah, because all of us, that when we're parents, we're like, I want my kids to just, be really happy and succeed and have a really amazing life. Like, it comes from a place of love. But sometimes our expectations, or sometimes what we, we project onto our kids is not necessarily what our kids want, and sometimes it's our kids going, hey, let me be who I need to be in the world. And so that's where sometimes the rub comes, because we're like, but I need you to be successful because, that will reflect back on me and say that I've done a good job, or, I want you to be successful so you don't ever have to struggle. And they're all well-meaning things, right? But the child has its own story, and the child's like going, well, I kind of, I would find great pleasure in just living in the forest and chopping wood all day, and it would feel good for me, right? We're like, but no, you could be this. But
Right.
actually the child's going, actually, this is what feels in harmony for me. So
But
it's a really huge challenge as a parent to trust and let go of our kids' journeys.
there is this friction, though, right, between letting go and trusting in our kids' journeys and wanting them to be their authentic self, and also recognizing that they're idiots, when they're real little, and that they don't really know, they haven't lived. They're 2, they're 5, they're 7, and they need guidance also. There's that, right? There's that, it seems to me,
Absolutely.
there's that constant friction.
There is, and it is. We are our children's guide. That it's a beautiful way how you're explaining that there. We don't have kids and then at 3 go, all right, you're on your own, off you go, figure it
Right.
out who
Whatever you
you
want.
are, right?
Yeah.
We are
Right.
there to guide them and to absolutely to support them. I think the bigger picture is watching our expectations
Yeah.
and our belief of what we think our children should be.
Yeah.
So of course we're teaching them how to use their manners and, how to be, compassionate citizen of the earth. Like, that's a really important thing that we want to guide our children to, and we want to teach them how to read and write, and we want to teach them, how to take care of someone else and how to have compassion and empathy and all those beautiful things. Our children get that because they watch us. So much of our teaching of our children is by the modeling of what we do. So absolutely, we are doing that. And of course, there's going to be times where your 4-year-old's like, I don't want to brush my teeth. And we're like, well, sorry, mate, it's non-negotiable. Like,
Right.
we've got to brush your teeth. And we are going to have some push up, but the way that we respond to that, we can still do it compassionately and with kindness, not with that power over. But I think that the bigger picture is often being really curious as to the subtle pressures that we sometimes put on our kids, or the expectations that we have that sometimes are often unconscious. We don't even realize we're doing.
And then speaking of that, when you say trying not to be reactive, but it is kind of embedded. When you say reactive and people refer to it as a knee-jerk reaction, there is something to that. There is a physiology to that. And so when the rubber hits the road, so to speak, when you are reacting, usually you become aware of it way past the point where you've reacted. So what's your advice on noticing that moment before you react? How do you create that space?
Yeah, it's a great question. Wow. I mean, it's interesting. When people sometimes say, I want to be successful, or this is what success looks like. My comment these days when people say, what is success? I often answer, success is a calm nervous system, right? Like, if I wake up in the morning and go, I feel calm and I feel like I don't have any anxiety and life feels good, I'm like, I feel like I'm winning at life, right?
Right.
Now, the reason
Yeah.
why I'm saying that is because when we want to get to a point where we are reactive, it has got a lot to do with our nervous system. It's got a lot to do with our stresses, anxiety, all those kind of things. When we are living in a really, really stressed environment, right, and we've got lots of balls in the air and we're worried and perhaps we've got trauma on board, all that kind of stuff, our natural default is going to be from a reactive state, right? When our child refuses to get in the bath, or our teenager won't take the dog for a walk, and the next minute we just fire up. And usually, if we are in a state of kind of stress, then that is where we're going to react quickly. So, from a maintenance point of view, I say our job as parents is to take care of ourselves so we can decrease that stress, so that when our child is like going, "No, I'm not going to brush my teeth," we have the capability to take a deep breath and look behind that behavior there and go, "All right, doesn't want to brush his teeth. How can I find a playful way to connect to make this happen? Or how can I
Yeah.
take a deep breath and go, right, I'm going to respond with a really calm boundary here of what needs to happen." So again, I think the first piece coming back to is, how do we take care of us and our nervous system so we aren't reactive? Because there is no doubt, when we are really, really stressed or there's a lot going on, we do go from 0 to 100 quickly. So for me, firstly, the maintenance is, how do we bring it down a bit? The second thing is, when we are in the moment and when we can start to feel that blood boiling, one of the things I invite parents to do often is to catch it if you can in the moment and actually speak what's going on. So you might say something out loud like, "I am starting to feel frustrated,"
Mm.
or "I can start to feel anger moving in my body." And when we have frustration and anger, one of the most important things that we can often do in our body is to move our body. So one of the things I say to parents is, even if you just start shaking your hands or your shoulders or your arms or something, to be like, "I am feeling frustrated right now." And it's sending a message to the body that says, yeah, you've got some stuff brewing. Let's find a healthier way to try and discharge this than projecting it onto our kids right now.
Yeah.
So sometimes even just acknowledging, "Oh, I'm starting to feel frustrated right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to go into the bathroom and run some cold water on my hands just to cool down for a minute. I'm going to step outside and take a deep breath and remind myself, I am the adult here. This is not an emergency," right? So sometimes that works beautifully. But when we are stressed, or it is the end of the day when we're tired, then our capacity to do that lessens. And that's where we do kind of fire off. And I think we have to have deep compassion for ourselves, because we all do it at some point. We've all done it before. I mean, I have 3 kids. They are 23, 20, and 16. And when I was a young mum with those kids when they were little, I yelled, I was frustrated. I was not taking care of myself and trying to live up to this expectation. And so therefore I was a really reactive parent. And then when I started to go, actually, I have to look at what I need for me to be able to be the calm parent I want to be. And as I started taking care of my own needs and working to decrease my stress and look at my own stories and traumas, then the yelling decreased, right? To a point where then I actually didn't end up yelling anymore, so that when my kids weren't responding to me, or they weren't listening, or they were being reactive, then what I'd do is I was better at taking a deep breath and getting curious as to what was happening for them and responding in that way that I want to. But it takes practice, and it takes looking after ourselves so that we can be, I often say our job is to be the calm anchor in a storm, so that our kiddos are these little boats on the ocean, and sometimes it's smooth sailing and it's beautiful, but sometimes it's really rocky. And our children need to know that even in the rockiest bits, we've got them. We can be that calm anchor for them, even when things are really, really rough.
Yeah. There's a saying in psychology, name it and tame it.
Yeah.
With the idea,
Yeah.
right? You just identify the feeling, the emotion, and that
Yeah.
helps, just
Yeah.
Yeah.
calm it down.
And then here's the thing. I love name it to tame it. And then the next bit can be feel it to heal it, which means we name the feeling and we're like, okay, I'm hearing it. And then we've got the anger might be rising. So we go, well, how do I feel this anger in a healthy way? I'm going to go outside and yell at the trees for a bit to allow the anger to dissipate, or I'm going to put on some music and do some angry dancing and just get it out of my system. I'm going to feel it, or I'm going to feel the sadness that sits there, because then we feel it, we let it go, heal it, then we're less likely to be reactive as well.
As long as you can rhyme it. I was trying to think of something to rhyme with rhyme, and I couldn't do it. As long as you can rhyme it, you can make it go
They
away.
can time it. No.
The idea of needs of parents. I've heard you talk about that before, and it's
Something that we talked about that
Yes.
we couldn't really completely pin down.
Yeah.
And
And we had different thoughts about it
Yeah.
also. And so how do you know when a need is a want versus a need, especially when you think about, when you get on that, what do you call it?
the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah.
Because the idea is the hedonic treadmill is usually referred to as something that you are trying to look for the shiny things and it's never enough and so on and so forth. But we could see that becoming a psychological state as well. You know, when you need that cup of coffee, okay, but now you may need to go out for a movie. And then, well, you need to do it twice now a week. And then, you know, it's kind of that same hedonic treadmill expands and expands and expands. And
At what I have 3 kids too, and it's you know, you're always wondering to yourself, at what point am I being selfish? At what point is this something I really need to do, or do I just want to do it? You know, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think for me, I kind of come back to this is that we all have desires and wants, which is amazing, and we should have them. And I think it's good and it's healthy to go, yes, this brings me joy and this feels amazing. I think what I have discovered about humans over the years is that when we are what I call in balance, right? So when we're feeling calm in our nervous system and, you know, we're taking care of ourselves, we have that kind of feeling. We're like, yeah, I would love a cup of coffee because that feels good, right? Or as you say, I'm going to go to the movies because that will be fun, and we do those kind of things. But when we are out of balance a little bit, we can move towards wanting to repress our feelings, which can sometimes look like doing things so that we kind of numb out a bit. So what that can look like in adults is that there is, if I've got a whole lot of stuff going on, our default can be to pick up our phone and just scroll on Instagram for 2 hours, right? It can be, you know, I want to buy more shoes, you know, because I think shoes make me happy. Or I want to play this game online and I'm just going to keep playing it, right? Because why shouldn't I play this game, right? And so sometimes what we do is we move towards things that actually are about repressing what's going on and numbing, and we justify them because, but that makes me feel good. But actually what it's doing is it's often a numbing. It's a bit like eating all the chocolate, eating all the
Right.
ice cream, drinking all the wine, right? And so I think, again, when we are in balance, we usually have a bit more of a healthier a sense of, yeah, that would feel good. That's a great thing to do. And that will meet my need here. But when life is stressful, we will often default to these repression mechanisms to kind of numb ourselves out a bit. And that is where we need to be curious. Like, why do I want to eat like more chocolate? Or why am I just like going, you know, those black pants don't really hit the button, so I'll buy another pair, or I'll do something because we're
Right.
looking for that. Sometimes we look for that dopamine hit, or we're looking for that. I am looking for something outside of me to soothe actually a whole lot of stuff that's going on inside of me. And it's never actually enough, right? It hits a point and then we're like, we want more, or we want more. And look, social media, the internet is golden for that, because it's easy to just sit there and scroll on Instagram for 2 hours and it's gone by, you know, and then we're like, oh gosh, that was 2 hours of my life just gone. And what we're looking for, or what it's serving, is actually just a numbing of what's going on, because we actually don't want to feel what's happening. So that's how I often see it, you know, and I see that in children a lot. And I also see it in adults a lot, that we default to, we default to, what am I doing here if I don't actually want to be present and feel what's going on? So I think we need to be curious about the nuances with it and what it's giving us when we want those kind of things.
Oh, that's so insightful.
so in other words, whenever you're going to pick up that phone and start to scroll, have that as a trigger for your own introspection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I think we have to be curious. Like, so much of, for me, parenting or just living is about that curiosity of, what am I making this mean right here, or what is this about? I mean, and that we could use the word mindfulness with that, right? I mean, mindfulness is a bit of a buzzword these days, but it's being curious as to, what am I doing? Now, there are times where we've had a really stressful day at work and things are full on, and you might get home and go, yep, I am going to have a glass of wine and I'm going to binge watch like 5, you know, shows of this season that I'm watching, right? And we can be aware that we're doing it because I feel stressful. And it's okay that we do that, right? Because we're human. But if we are doing that every day, then that becomes an issue. And that's where we want to be curious about it. We want to be curious as to the motivation. I mean, there are times where, you know, things are big and you get home and you sit on the couch and go, yeah, I am just going to scroll through the internet for a bit. And then we go, okay, yep, no, that's enough. Now I need to go connect with humans, or I need to go do something. But that repression that we are all often conditioned to do from very, very early on is often a default that we don't even realize we're doing. And little children will do it right from the beginning, right? When they're upset or they're not getting their needs met, they'll ask for sugar. They'll want to eat all the time, or they'll want to be on screens all the time. Or a repression mechanism, which we kind of think is actually not so bad as a culture, a society, is actually being busy. So as little kids, often if they can't be still or there isn't that calmness in their body, they'll just keep moving all the time. And then we grow up to be adults that just go, oh, I'm only okay if I'm moving, right? So I just keep being really busy. I'm working so much. There's no time to stop. And we often wear it as a badge of honor that, look how much hustle I've got and look what I'm doing. Whereas actually what we're often doing is we're avoiding being still, because if we're still, all our feelings are going to come up and that feels pretty terrifying. So just keep moving, right? So we do that. Or, I'm pretty good at doing that as well, right? You get busy and especially if you like what you do, it's easy to slip into that pattern of just, you just keep moving and you keep going. And I think it's about finding the balance of the stillness and the reflection and honoring what we're feeling and what's there. But I think it's also a lot of compassion, because most of us weren't taught healthy ways to feel our feelings. And so when we're not taught that, we have to find something to do with it. So we learn how to repress it. And that becomes a bit of a protective mechanism.
And it's not easy though to find that. It's not like you can stop and say, well, I notice that I'm being busy, but what if I stop? What if I'm not busy? Why am I doing this? It's not like the answer is going to be very apparent to you, right? And that goes into, I think we as humans, both psychologically and physically, are bound to escape pain. I mean, when you think about limping, right? When you limp, what do? Well, you just put more weight on the side that doesn't hurt. And the funny thing is, when someone is limping, they're usually bound to find out, not from themselves, not from their awareness, but by people asking them, well, you're limping, why is that? No, I'm not, right? The first thing that most people will say is, no, I'm not. Not that they will find the pain that's causing them to limp. So how do you go about the frustration that comes along with, okay, now I'm aware that I'm scrolling or I'm being busy because I'm escaping something, but now that I stop and look, I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know how to find it.
So here's the interesting thing. The antidote to repression is connection. So when we are in those repression mechanisms, right, when we are doing that, what we firstly need to be aware of is we're actually doing it, and that can be tricky. And again, there's some hints that will often happen. I mean, if you're in a relationship and your repression mechanism is to be super, super busy, then your partner's probably going to call you out on it, right? Or if your repression mechanism is just to sit and scroll on Instagram for 3 hours, your partner's probably going to get sick of that at some point, right? Will call you out on it, right? So sometimes we have others in our lives going, why are you drinking 2 bottles of wine at night? Or why are you doing that, right? And again, it's about being compassionate enough with ourselves to honor that and go, yep, that's actually what I'm doing. And okay, there's something probably going on for me here. So the antidote to repression is always connection, which means that when we are in that kind of loop of just numbing out, what actually helps us move out of that is connection with another human, is connection. So it might be you go, yeah, I'm going to put my phone down and hey, how about we play cards together, or we just do something? How about we cuddle up on the couch and have a chat about what's going on? Or for children, when they're in repression, the number one thing we can do is to move in with connection, which can be play, which can be laughing, which can be, just again, snuggling up together, having some closeness, all those kind of things. That is what helps alleviate that repression. But the first piece is being aware of it. I'm actually doing it. That's okay. So I say to people, look, if your repression mechanism is, scrolling on your phone or it's that kind of stuff, when you pick it up, set a timer on your phone to go, I'm going to give myself 15 minutes to do this. And when the timer goes off, I'm actually going to get up and I'm going to go call a friend, or I'm going to go move my body, or I'm going to go, we start to kind of train ourselves out of doing it. Or, we have to bring some mindfulness to it. If your repression is eating chocolate, then actually bring presence to it. I'm going to eat this piece of chocolate and I'm going to be really present with it. I'm going to really see what it tastes like when I put it in my mouth and taste the sweetness and bring some presence to it. So we're actually, again, we're not judging it, but we're bringing presence to it to be able to then go, okay, I'm actually doing this in this moment, and that is okay. And when we bring presence to it, we're then less likely to be in the numbing of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's where we can begin
like
to
that.
shift and change it. But the other thing too, I mean, because this really is like where addictions happen, right? Like what I'm talking about here is addictions that can then turn into, if that's alcohol or it's drugs or smoking or all those kind of things. That's where often addictions happen, because addictions are usually around numbing what we don't want to feel, right? It's numbing the pain. And so for some of us with strong repression mechanisms, we're doing that, but just kind of on a lower level. We're just numbing what we don't want to feel. And we know that just saying to someone, well, just stop smoking or just stop drinking, it doesn't work, right? Because if we could just stop, we would. But what happens is we need connection, we need love, we need support to be able to feel safe enough to feel the feelings that it's masking, so that we can then work through those feelings. We feel it to heal it, that then we actually begin to do that repression less.
Yeah. Does meditation have a large role to play? Or like
Yeah.
I was initially thinking that, but the more that you were speaking, I was thinking, oh, maybe not. Maybe it's more about connection, but I guess it's probably both.
Well, it could be both. I mean, I'm really big around what works for you. For some people, moving their body is really important. They need that exercise, they need to move. That's what helps them bring them back into balance. For a lot of people, I think when it comes to feelings and stuff as well, because again, we've all learnt from a pretty young age to kind of numb a lot of our feelings. We often need safety in order to feel them. And safety can mean another person who is really compassionate and empathetic and brings that connection. So we allow ourselves to actually feel it. But I think everybody's different. For some people I work with where they're really aware that they're numbing, I'm like, what would it feel like to just pick up a pen and paper and write how you feel instead of speaking it? Because speaking it can feel scary for some people.
Hmm.
And they're like, okay, I'll write it down, and I'm giving it a bit of a forum to find a way out. So I think it's about doing whatever works for you that's going to take you out of that kind of numbing state into more, I guess, presence and awareness, and allowing ourselves to gently be felt.
I'm really starting to second guess my binge watching The Gentleman.
Do you know what? I was away speaking the other night. I came home and my husband's looking really bleary eyed. And I'm like, are you all right? And he goes, I stayed up till 3 o'clock watching The Gentleman. And he goes, I couldn't stop. And then my heart was racing. And then
Yes.
I was like, oh, babe. And he goes, I know you should not start a show like that at 10 o'clock at night.
Yes.
He's like, I could not stop. And I was like, all right. But here's the thing. We can do that at a certain point, and it's okay. Like, it's
Right.
not bad. It's if we are doing it all the time,
Yes.
that's when we've got a bit of an issue.
Yes. No, yes, that's The Gentleman is a special show.
It's okay to 3 o'clock in the morning. Yes.
Yeah.
I think this is a good segue.
Segue to character.
Yes, the character, and you just were talking about safety, and I think this is a good way to ask you about building resilience in children.
Mm.
How do you think of that?
Yeah. So, I think, and I often talk about resilience here in Australia, because in Australia, we are a culture that is very much about when something goes bad, you just kind of suck it up and you power on and you have grit, and we reward that. And so for a long time here in Australia, in a culture, we have rewarded stoicism. Like, it's just like, look how tough they are and they got through and all that kind of stuff. And I think then we label that as resilience, and it's actually not. Like, resilience is when something tricky happens, when we're going through some form of adversity, we navigate whatever that situation is. We feel the feelings connected to whatever happens, or we ask for support around us to feel whatever's happened. We process it, and then we move forward. That's resilience. Resilience isn't our ability to just, hold on tight and bury it down and then move forward, because it will show up later somewhere, right? That is basically taking trauma, pushing it down, but then it's going to turn up in the body. It's going to turn up later in an incident that's similar to whatever's happened. We have to work with stuff that's there. So for me, resilience is very much about helping our children navigate the really tricky, hard stuff. So one of the questions I often ask whenever I do talks to parents is I often say, if you were to go to your kids and you were to say to them, is it okay not to be the best? Is it okay to make a mistake? And are you, as the parent, a safe place to come when things are hard? Now, a lot of the time, parents, I think, hopefully go, well, I hope the answer to all those questions is yes. It's okay to not be the best, and it's okay to make a mistake. And yeah, my kids will come to me when things are tricky. But what I often say to them, but what we model to our children and how we respond to them often tells a different story. And this for me has got a lot to do with how we respond to kids' feelings and emotions. Because when our kids are going through tricky stuff, ideally what we want is for them to go, hey, my mum or my dad or whoever's that caregiver can hold all that I feel around what's going on. And to go a bit deeper on this, what I mean is most of us have grown up in environments in what we call a behaviorism paradigm, which basically means I love you when you're good, and when you're bad, I'll take something away from you. So this is kind of how the majority of our world works here in the Western world. So when you do something well, I'll praise you, I'll reward you, and I'll boost you up. And when you don't behave in a way I don't want, I'm going to take something away from you. I'm going to ground you. I'm going to withdraw my love from you. And what happens with that dynamic is we begin to have an imprint that says, I am only lovable when I'm good. And so therefore, because our key survival state is about attachment, we learn as little kids, well, in order to survive, I must be good all the time. And we become very good boys and good girls. Now, I think people go, but that's the goal, isn't it? To raise good boy and good girl. And I say, actually, it's not. Because when we become very good boys and good girls, what we often learn to do is suppress our anger. We often learn to not express how we really feel about things. And we are often outsourcing our worth to everybody else. So we grow up then to be adults that are constantly going, well, do you approve of me? Or do you like the way I look? Or am I good enough in your eyes? And we spend a lot of time worrying what people think about us, instead of actually knowing who I am is enough. Purely because I am enough, right? I mean, I often joke, when you are a parent and you hold your newborn baby in your hands and you see them for the first time, you are not thinking, I don't know if they're enough, right? You look at your
We'll
baby
see.
and you're like,
We'll see how this
yeah,
pans out. Yeah.
yeah. You look at your baby and you're like, you are perfection. You are divine. You are amazing, right? Your beautiful baby is born just the best, most gorgeous little human ever, right? And then what happens is we then, grow into the world and we start to learn, thanks to kind of the world and society, or perhaps how we're raised, that I'm only enough if I fit this box or I do it this way. And I say this because I have worked with thousands of adults. And when we look at the wounds that often surface as adults, which always kind of stem back to our childhood stories, the story that comes up again and again and again and again is, am I enough, right? Am I enough just the way I am? That is that kind of core wound. And so where I'm getting to around resilience with this is part of our job as parents is to be able to support our children to know, hey, I love you when you're sad. I love you when you're angry. I love you when you're happy. I love you when you're feeling joy and you're passionate about stuff. All of you is welcome. Because it then sets up a story in the child that says, hey, all of me is lovable, not just the parts that are good. Now, how does that actually look in practice? Well, a lot of that is often about that when our 3-year-old is having a tantrum because we cut their sandwich the wrong way, we don't yell at them for having a tantrum and we don't send them to their room and tell them to come out when they're good again. We as adults look behind the behavior and go, okay, my 3-year-old is having a big reaction to a sandwich. There must be something else going on here. And then if we were to be curious, we might find that, the child, it's 4:00 in the afternoon and the child spent, 6 hours at preschool and, they've been in a room with 20 other kids and someone knocked over their tower and then they didn't have what they really wanted to eat for lunch. And it's still hard separating from you, being at kinder all day or at preschool. And, then another boy pinched them because he was really unhappy with something. And there's been all these accumulated stresses, that has happened throughout their day. And then they get home and you cut their sandwich in a way they don't like. And then the next minute, their nervous system's like, here's all these big feelings, right? That is just standard normal for most kids, right? And a 3-year-old does not have the capacity to look at that sandwich and say, Mum, very disappointed in the way you cut my sandwich. Very, very stressful day.
Imagine if they did.
Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
If they did, I'd be like, wow, high five you, right?
That's right.
But at 3, we do not have the capacity to do that, to say, it feels hard separating from you and it's big being in a room with 20 other kids and I didn't like what you gave me for lunch and some boy projected all his feelings onto me and, that's hard to do at 3. It's hard to do at 13. It's hard to do at 30, right? So we still struggle with that as adults. And I think our job as adults when we are raising children is to understand particularly that development, that at 3, at 13, they are still learning the beautiful whole understanding of emotional awareness and how to express their feelings and what's going on for them. And as a 3-year-old is losing it over the pink cup instead of the blue cup or the sandwich or whatever it is, that child is not bad or naughty or wrong. That child is just saying, my nervous system's reached capacity. My brain has just gone offline. I need to reset myself. And the way they reset themselves is through crying, through shaking, through laughing, through having these big outbursts to allow them to come back into balance so that they feel connected in their bodies again. That's what they're learning and practicing to do up until about the age of 7. And then after about 7 or 8, they develop the ability to be able to say, Mum, I don't like the way you cut my sandwich. Or today was so hard because I didn't get picked in the basketball team. And they then develop the ability to articulate how I'm feeling. But we, for a long time, have made feelings wrong. And I think our job as an adult, particularly when we want to raise resilient kids, is to create enough safety for them to say, hey, it's okay for you to be angry. It's not okay for you to project that anger onto us. It's not okay for you to hit your brother. It's not okay for you to pick up that thing and throw it against the wall. But I'm here to help you move your anger in a safe and healthy way. And when children learn, hey, it's okay for me to be angry, it's okay for me to be sad, it's okay to feel frustrated, but I have a healthy way to express it, then they, when things go wrong and when things are hard, they are going to come to those adults that feel safe enough, process the feelings around what happened, and then be able to move forward and thrive. And again, what I've seen over these years is if a child goes through something that's really tricky, if they've gone through some adversity, if they have just one safe adult that they can go to who listens with compassion and empathy, and they're able to offload their feelings, then they will not have to carry that stress and trauma in their bodies, and they are able to absolutely thrive and move forward.
Right. It seems to me like there's this the important subtle distinction that you made, which is if you go back to the 3-year-old having a tantrum and you want to, be understanding, realize where it's coming from, not react emotionally, sort of validate the feelings that the 3-year-old is having even at 3. And at the same time, let them know that it's not that the way that they've chosen to express it, or not chosen, but just the way it's come out, is not an acceptable way, right? There are still boundaries that they need to adhere to, even though, and just show them more positive ways to express those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most fundamental pieces of that point that you brought up, is what we model to our children, because our children are constantly watching, right? So, what we often look at is, our kids kind of come into the world and they're watching who you are as a human, or what it is to be a human based on us. So they're watching how we are in intimate relationships. They're watching how we react to friends. They're watching what we do for work and how we talk about it. They're watching how we speak about our bodies. They're watching everything, right? And so particularly when it comes to feelings and emotions, our children are constantly watching what we do. So, and I often talk about this, is that our kids are so beautifully hardwired into us. And there'll be times where you may have experienced this, that you might be really angry, right? And your child comes up to you and they go, "Are you okay, Dad?" And often our default is to go, "Yeah, I'm fine, right?" But we're not fine. But what happens in that moment, which is, I think, something we need to be aware of, is our child is kind of intuitively tuning into you going, "I think something's off with Dad." But then when we say, "No, we're fine," right, the child goes, "Well, maybe my intuition's wrong, right? Because I think that you're not okay, but you're telling me you are, so maybe I'm wrong." Now, that's what we don't want. We want our kids to trust their intuition and their gut, because it's like a superpower. And in that moment, we have the most beautiful opportunity to model to our children what we do with our feelings. We are far better off saying in that moment, "You know what? I'm actually really angry. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a run because it feels better when I move my body. Or I'm going to get some paper and I'm going to rip it up because it feels good ripping stuff. Or I'm going to get a pillow and I'm going to kind of slam it on the floor," because anger often needs movement. Anger often needs something to move through the body. I'm going to push up against something. I'm going to put on some music and do some loud, angry dancing. You want to model a healthy way to move anger. But what do? We often yell, we slam doors, And then our kids do the same thing, and then we yell at them for doing it, right? So we want to model what is a healthy way to express my feelings here. We used to have in our lounge a basket with all the odd socks that the washing machine eats, right? We'd get all the odd socks and we'd put them into balls. And there was a basket in our lounge. And then when one of us was angry, we'd be like, go pick up the socks. And we'd pick up the socks and we'd throw them as hard as we can at the wall, right? Because again, anger often needs movement. This was a safe way to process the anger, to pick up the socks. No one's getting hurt. We're throwing it at the wall. And often what happens when we move that anger through our body, either we can sometimes end up laughing, which is a beautiful stress release, or we'll end up crying, which is also another beautiful stress release, and that we kind of then come back into balance. So what are we modeling to our kids about healthy expression of anger? Now, in the moment when a 3-year-old's having a tantrum, it's not the time to teach them, that is not an okay way to use your anger by hitting the dog, right? What we're going to do is we're going to get in there and say, I'm not willing for you to hurt the dog. I'm here to keep us all safe. And we just hopefully hold the space for the storm to pass. And then it's after that, when a child's back in balance, we go, you were really angry then, weren't you? And your 3-year-old's like, yeah. And you go, okay, it is okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hurt the dog. Yeah. What could we do next time you're mad? Do you want to throw these socks? Do you want to have a pillow fight? What do you want to do to move it, right? And it's the same about being sad, right? Our kids will tune in when we're upset. And again, I really invite all parents to just own where you're at. I'm actually really sad today, but I'm going to call a friend because I feel better when I talk to someone. Or I'm going to journal, or I'm going to do some yoga, or I'm going to have a cry because it actually feels better when I get it out. Like, our kids cannot be what they can't see. And so what we want to do is we want to keep modeling healthy ways to express our feelings so that then they learn, yes, that's what I can do next time I'm upset. So our guidance is absolutely going, your feelings are welcome. Projecting them onto someone else is not okay. How can we move them in healthy ways? So when my kids became, started to move into the tween teen years and they were angry, which is normal because we all get angry at some point. And if they were mad, I'd be like, what do you want to do? Do you want to box? Like, we used to have boxing gloves and pads. And I'd be like, let's box, right? And I would welcome them, like, come on, bring it. Let's go. You're angry. And, my 13-year-old daughter would be like, I'm angry at school. I hate that I have to do homework. And I hate the boys comment on my body. And I'd be like, yeah, babe, get it out. And she would punch and, and again, she would move it in a healthy way. So then she would feel calm. She might then talk about what was going on for her. That was a really good way for her to understand, hey, my job is not to pick a fight with my sister and take that anger out there. Yeah. Or it's not to, scream at you and say you're the worst mum in the world, right? My job is to be able to be aware enough to go, I am feeling something here. I need to move it in a healthy way. Now, most adults I work with don't do this, right? Because we haven't been taught how to do it. And so what we do is we either, when we get upset, we repress our feelings. So we shut them down. We do all the things we've talked about, or we project it onto everyone else, right? We take our anger out on our kids or our sibling or whatever, instead of actually owning what's there for us.
Can I ask a quick question? Is it normal for small kids to ask parents how they're feeling? Because I'm racking my brain to remember when that might have happened. Is that it?
It would be like, it would be kind of like when they're little, they sometimes just come up and they might say, are you okay, mum? Like, it wouldn't be necessarily a 3 or 4-year-old, but it's probably like a 5 or a 6-year-old who would just come up. Kids know when something's going on, right? They come up. What was that? Sorry?
I'm going to talk to my kids when I get home. I'd like to know why they've never asked me that.
Maybe you're just totally happy and in balance all the time, right? And it's never an issue.
They just know. They intuit it. Yeah. No, that's great.
So about something that you were talking about, the fact that we're not taught that. The problem, or what it seems like, it's not just that we're not taught that, but the fact is that a lot of the times we're given advice that's exact opposite of that. And so, for instance, Grant and I appreciate a lot of things that Jordan Peterson says and the advice that he gives. But one of the things that I've heard him say seem so much out of character and so opposite of what you were just describing, and in looking at it from this prism really, really makes a lot of sense why it doesn't make sense what he says. So basically what he said was that if a child is acting out, then you just basically take them at dinner, you just have them sit aside from the table, and when they're ready to rejoin the family and they're acting appropriately, then they'll rejoin the family. Which on so many levels. So on one hand, we are born into being a social animal. And from a very, very early age, we know that we're dependent on society and connections for our survival. And throughout the ages, what has been the capital punishment? It wasn't death, it was banishment, right? And so you're banishing the child from the table, from their family.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the confusing part, and this part didn't really dawn on me until what you were saying, the confusing part is the modeling, right? Because in the family, if there's another adult that is quote unquote acting out, basically saying something that's controversial or inflammatory, they're not asked to leave the table. They're not given a timeout, but the child is. And so there is that confusion as well. And you're giving them that you're not okay until you conform to our standards. So there's so many confusing things there. But this is probably a little worse than not being taught, but being taught something that's really the opposite of what you're describing.
Yes. I don't really agree with what he says around that, because I think what is happening in those moments is we're actually shaming children into behaving. And my fundamental belief is this, is that children want to connect with us. They want to be good. They want to do the right thing. But there's often stuff that gets in the way that stops them from doing that. Now, that can be the stress of, not being connected in the family. It could be that there's a new sibling in the family and your 4-year-old's really put out because a baby came along and all of a sudden the attention's there. It could be that your child has had a really rough day at school. They're being picked on, or they don't understand how to learn properly, and there's stresses and stuff there. And then when they come home, all they really want is to connect with a parent, but perhaps the parent's on the phone and another parent's working, and really they're not getting their needs met. So when kids aren't getting their needs met, they're going to try and get their needs met in some way. So sometimes that is acting out. Sometimes that's picking fights. Sometimes that's asking parents to play with them so they can have that connection and stuff. So my theory is always this, a child is always communicating something to us, and it's our job to be curious as to what that is. So in my scenario, if a child is sitting at the table and they're acting out, to me, that's them sitting there waving a red flag saying, I'm having a hard time. Right.
And just a quick question on that, and just curious about what you think of this, and not to interrupt your train of thought on that. I've heard somewhere that someone said that the child will make you feel what they're feeling. So it's very easy to basically understand. And you say, well, they're throwing a tantrum. How does that make you feel? Frustrated? Yeah, you don't know what to do. You don't. Well, that's what they're
How
feeling.
they're feeling. Yeah. And that's true. Like it's they're communicating to you, because it's very hard for a 5-year-old, as we've said, to sit there at the table and say, I'm really stressed at the moment because we've just moved house and that feels scary, or I'm not very good at learning at school, or some kid's picking on me. Like, we are still learning how to communicate in those ways. Again, I will really say a lot of adults do not know how to really communicate about what's going on for them, right? Yet we have this expectation on children that they should be far more emotionally intelligent than what we are. So if we are sitting at the table and one of the kids is acting out, my first step is to be like, I wonder what's going on here, because a child's natural state is to be connected and to feel good. And if they're not, then they're telling me something and they're waving a red flag saying I'm having a hard time. Now, I often would say, all right, so let's imagine that child sitting there having a hard time. And if we then start yelling at that child, why can't you just sit still? Like, stop being ridiculous, right? What is going to happen for that child in that moment? How's that child feeling? So if we're that child for a second and then there's an adult yelling at us, why can't you sit still? What happens is that child isn't sitting there going, oh, yes, I should make a better choice right now. That child is just adding more fuel to their backpack of emotional dysregulation to go, okay, well, now my parents don't even understand me and they don't get what's going on. So I'm going to turn the dial up even more. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up some food and throw it at my sister, or I'm going to do something else. Now, again, if we respond with more power over, more kind of authoritarian, you must be good, and we take them out and we make them sit in the corner, again, what's happening is that child is not sitting there going, I've made a poor choice, but that child is going, not, I've done something bad, but I am bad. And then what happens in that situation is we begin to then start that ball rolling of, I am not enough, there is something wrong with me. This is when the inner critic really pops in. And again, that child may quieten down and come back to the table, but not because they've learnt a lesson, because their fundamental survival is based on attachment with that caregiver, right? So they basically learn to abandon how they're really feeling in order to be good, to get love and to survive, right? Now, again, this is what I have to tell you, I have worked with thousands of parents who have been in those scenarios. And then I say to them, all right, let's go back to being that 5-year-old for a minute. What did you want from your parents in that moment when you were at the table and you're having a hard time? And every adult says the same thing. I wanted a parent to get down on my level, look me in the eye and say, I can see you're having a hard time. I'm here to help you, right? Let's connect. Let's play. I'm not going to let you throw that food, but I'm going to help you move whatever's sitting here.
How do you balance the emotional component? Like, let's say you have a child who acts out in a certain way that's unacceptable, whatever that may be. And you want to balance having that emotional connection and taking that breath with also, is there any punishment that goes along with these things? Is there any kind of repercussions, or is it, because at a certain point, you could say that you're rewarding the bad behavior with the extra attention, so there must be some sort of a friction there between those two things.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to like what I'm going to say, but here I am. I do not believe in punishments. I don't. And mainly because, again, where I sit with is this: there is always a reason for the behavior, right? A child is acting out at the dinner table, okay, and we are wanting to teach our kids how to, be, again, normal citizens, and be respectful and stuff like that. And when a child feels good, they are able to do that. But when a child isn't feeling good, then it's very hard for them to cooperate. It's very hard for them to not sit in the classroom and do their work when their nervous system, is like this, right? It's very hard for them to sit at the dinner table when they've got a massive backpack of feelings going on. And so when we come in with punishments, again, what punishments do, and punishments and the rewards are kind of the same side of the coin. What they do is they basically then kind of set up this story of again, that behaviorism. You must fit into this box in order to be loved. Now, the impact of punishments is this, is if we say to that child, right, you cannot have dessert because you're not sitting here properly. Again, what we're doing is we're saying you need to conform into my idea of what is acceptable. And we're actually not getting to the root cause of what's happening. Often what we do is we just add more stuff to that backpack of feelings that are sitting there. So for me, and again, in my theory, or just a lot of the work that I've worked with, when we see a child having a hard time, our question is to be, right, wonder what's going on. How do I help them come back into balance? What can I do there? It is not a reward. It's actually a child saying, I need some connection here because I'm having a hard time. I cannot cope, right? And so when we bring that connection, we help them move whatever's going on. They hopefully come back into balance and they're able to continue on. Now, our kids are going to mess up because they're meant to, right? They're meant to make mistakes. And I have a story about my son when he was about 15. And it was one of those classic scenarios where he lied about where he was going, right? So he said he's going to his friend's house and his friend said he was going to our house and they were at neither house. And we cottoned on that we're like, he's not where he says he is. So we message him and we're like, hey, mate, where are you? And he committed to the lie, which was, I'm like, well done. He's like, no, child. Like, yeah, no, you're not. So we gave him an out. And then we said again, we know you're not where you are. We're going to come pick you up. So we go and pick his mate up and he comes home. And, to be honest, I was angry. Like I was just like, he lied to us. That's not okay. I had a whole lot of feelings, but I also knew I needed to offload them over here before I even had a conversation with him. So I said to my husband, I need to get out all the things I'm feeling. So we kind of talked it out first, got it out. And then we went and sat down with my son. And I actually said this to him. I said, I am really sorry if I've not made it safe enough for you to tell me the truth. No, he just kind of went.
You use guilt.
Whoa. No, I didn't use guilt. I actually just said, this is on me because my job as a parent is to make it safe enough for you to tell me what's going on. And somewhere in this, I've not made it safe enough for you to tell me. So what's happening here? And then he looked at me and he goes, and he went to a girl's house and he goes, Mum, you get so excited when I talk about girls. Like you just want to know all the details. I just couldn't handle all the questions. So I just didn't tell you where I was going. Now, we laughed and I went, you are so right. In my desire to make it really open and for my kids to be really transparent about what's going on, I was too over the top, right? And actually, what he was saying is, I need a bit of privacy here around this stuff. And I said to him, I've got it. I will back off on the whole girl thing. But what is really important for me and Dad is to know where you are, right? That's one of our core values here is that safety piece of knowing where you are. And he's like, yeah, I got it. And that was the last time he ever lied to me about where he was, right? Now, here's the thing. I could have come down hard on him. I could have punished him. I could have taken his phone away from him. I could have said, you can't play soccer for 3 weeks, whatever it is. Now, all that is going to do is create more disconnection in our relationship. It is less likely that he's actually going to tell me the truth. And again, I see everything as a beautiful learning experience. Now, it also doesn't mean that if our kids mess up, there's not consequences. You know, my kids have messed up in all the ways, right? And if they've hurt someone or something's happened, you know, I'm like, hey, there's got to be repair here, or there's got to be consequences for what you've done. But I am not going to bring a punishment to say, because you've done something, I've taken something away. Because often all it does is create greater disconnection. Now, here's the thing, and again, you know, I know that not everybody loves this because we have been raised in a culture where our belief system is this: if you do something wrong, I need to make you feel bad in order for you to do better. And if you look at the work of Alfie Kohn, he's an amazing American educator. And he's got a great book called Punished by Rewards. And he's written a lot about what this looks like in our schooling systems. And it's a lot around what happens when we use punishments in this way. Often actually all it does is create greater disconnection. It makes kids better at lying, because why on earth would they tell you the truth if they're going to get punished, right? And it often doesn't make them really accountable for their behavior. What makes people accountable is when they feel connected, when they're not feeling the shame of what they're doing, and then they will often go and repair. So, you know, it's a bigger, longer game. You know, I think punishments and rewards will often get quick fixes, right? But if you want a longer relationship where it's based on connection and mutual respect and honesty, then we are looking at these experiences as learning experiences. We're looking at them as going, hey, we've made a mistake. So again, if my kids were little and they hit their brother or something like that, you know, I'd be in there. I'm like, I'm not willing for you to hit, and that is not okay. And I'm going to help you offload the reason behind why you're doing it. And then I'm going to come back to, you need to repair. How would you like to repair with your brother and sister? And then often the repair was very genuine because they were back in balance and they owned their behavior.
How do you handle a situation where you say, like, suppose, I understand that it wasn't, but let's just suppose that one of your core values was, my son's not going to date a girl until he's 17 and he's 15 and he wants to date this girl. And so we have this fundamental opposition here. Mm-hmm. I understand where he's coming from. He understands where I'm coming from. We just don't see it eye to eye. And we've talked about it. And now we have this, What do you do with that? Do you say, well, this is his authentic self and he wants to do these activities at this age, and so who am I to how do you think about that?
Well, it's tricky. I think every family's different and it depends on your values. I mean, my bottom line is always this: how do we all get our needs met here? Right? You know, and I think in any family discussion, and when stuff's come up with our kids, we've sat down and we've gone, how do we get our needs met? Right? So you have a need to hang out with a girl, and my need is actually just to, I don't know, keep you safe or make sure you do schoolwork or whatever whatever the need is there. How do we both explore where our stories come from within this, right? And how do we still stay connected even if we are sitting on different pages with it? So it might be that there's a compromise that you go, well, you know, look, I'm happy for you to have her over at our house and you guys can hang out together, but you're not going out on a date, like an official date, or, you know, you might find a way that you can meet your needs there. And I think every family's different, right? So there's not a one size that fits all.
Sure.
And I think every child is different as well. And my philosophy always comes back to this. We are a lot of the time with teenagers going to have different places that we land, right? You know, a teenager's going to be like, it's fine at 16 to go to a party where there's alcohol and no parents and 200 kids. It's fine. And you're like, actually, that is not fine, right? And we might set a limit with it, which is, hey, that's a no. And you're allowed to be upset that you're not going. But I also, you know, I see that there's a big part of you that feels like you're going to miss out. So do you want to have 4 friends to our house instead and you guys can hang out, right?
Can I give you a scenario there?
Pardon?
So you have that. Let me give you a scenario there. So you have that exact same situation where you say, look, it's fine. You could have 4 friends over here, but that 200 person party, that's just a total no-go. And they say, sure. And then they go out the window.
Okay, so again, so what we're looking at here is when our kids are kind of lying or they're being sneaky in that. Again, sometimes kids do it to really test what's going to happen here. Like, and sometimes kids will be like, do you still love me even when I'm bringing my messiest self to you, right? That's what they're asking. Now, again, when kids don't have a lot of connection in family, they will often do those things because they're kind of like, I don't care what mum and dad say. Like there's too much disconnection there that they're in that like, I actually don't care, right? So we want to prioritize the connection to be like, and sometimes that connections looks like kicking the footy together. It looks like hanging out, like going for a bike ride, playing card, doing something where we're actually connecting, where it's not about us telling them all the things they're doing wrong or all those kind of things. It's just about that laughter and connection, which brings more safety, which makes a kid want to actually do the right thing, right? Now, in a situation like that, again, they sneak out the window and we find out, we can come in hot and be like, how dare you? And you're not going out for a month and all that stuff. Firstly, my tip was always take your anger somewhere else first, burn it off so you can come back and be the calm parent to be like, okay, let's talk about this, right? Because, I don't want you to lie to me and I don't want you to feel like you have to lie. And I know that you wanted to go to that party, but that's actually a no. So what are we going to do here around this scenario? And we start to talk about what could happen around that. Now that may be, mate, that's felt a real trust, a violation. I think we're going to just chill at home for the next week and not do stuff, right? Now, not so much coming in with the grounding and you can't, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of connect with you more, right? To try and build more of that trust than actually withdrawing my love from you. Because again, think about it from the teenage point of view. You ground them, and we're angry with them and we're not going to give them any energy. All it's doing is driving them further away, right? As opposed to, I'm going to kind of love bomb you with connection. You are going to hate playing cards with me by the end of the week, right? But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to strengthen our connection. Because then what happens when that connection's strengthened and you're playing cards, then your teenager may put down the cards and go, you know what, there's this girl at this party. I really like her and I think she likes me. And it was the only time I was going to actually get to see her. And, that's really exciting for me. And all of a sudden they've opened up around the why, right? That's what we want to get to. Whereas when we're coming in with those things, then we're creating often much more disconnection. Now, I know I'm talking about it kind of top level here and I know people's reactions because I talk about this be like, well, that's outrageous and they're going to get away with everything, right? There's a lot more nuanced within this. But what I have found over these years is that when we have connection with our kids and when we prioritize that, they want to do the right thing, right? No child feels good hitting another child, lying, sneaking, all that kind of stuff. They're doing it because they're trying to get a need met, or they're doing it because they feel so bad about themselves, right? They're just like, well, I don't care anyway. We actually don't want them to care. We want them to feel good, to be like, hey, I want to do the right thing. Now, it's also, again, when we have teenagers, boundaries are super important and we want to allow them to push up against those boundaries. And often they will look for boundaries because they're looking for a good reason to offload all the stresses they're feeling. And parents are sometimes the safest place to bring it. So they will push your buttons and they will pick fights with their siblings. And again, what they're often saying is this a safe place for me to offload all the stresses that I've got? And our job is to be like, you're angry, you're mad, bring it. But, you're not allowed to hit each other. And, you can, speaking to me in that tone doesn't feel good, but you're mad. I'm going to help you get it out. And then we're going to have a conversation, right? Yeah. Like I do laughter. The times my kids have all done stupid stuff, right? That one time a friend was there and they were doing something and this friend of my son's like, oh my God, your parent's going to lose it. And my son's like, oh no, we're just going to all have to sit down and talk about it.
It's worse.
Like, worse. It sounds terrifying. But here we are. And, like at nearly 24, my son, we have conversations about this and he's like, he talks about, again, the difference in this family and then in other families and what he saw. He said, I never felt that there was anything I couldn't bring to you guys.
Yeah, that's what you ultimately want.
Yeah, he's like, I knew that if we were at a party and someone was in trouble, he goes, we would ring you. And we knew, and all my friends knew that we would ring you, right? And their friends did ring us sometimes because we were like, we want to keep you safe. and we're coming to get you. And we, really that's what our priority was, right? Because kids are going to take risks and we want to know that they're going to call us and say, we're going to help you. And we're also going to have lots of candid conversations about all the big topics. We're going to talk about alcohol and drugs and sex and all the things so that they have got the right information, so that we are aware of the risks, so that we are all open to talking about how we do, how we explore life, how we do stuff in ways that are safe. And so, I think that for me was the goal always. And my kids who are adults now all reflect that as much as there were times where you set limits and we didn't like them, we understood why, right? And it felt safer to explore what we needed to, but also know that you were the place where we could come.
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna bring us back for a second about the punishment, and not in that context. With teenagers, it's a very complicated scenario, but with younger children and consequences versus punishment. Another example: if you have two siblings that were fighting and one of them broke another's toy, and now you've connected with them about their feelings and why they were angry and why they broke that toy, and now everybody's calm and they've realized what they've done, and they now say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to break that toy and I didn't want to break that toy. But now the sibling is missing that toy, and now let's say they had both the same toys, and the sibling that broke the toy still has that toy. What do you do at that point?
That's the repair.
Well,
Yeah.
then how do you repair? And then the child that broke the toy says, no, but I said I'm sorry, and I really
Yeah.
didn't mean to.
Yeah. So again, in situations like that, it could be, again, there's many different scenarios. It could be that a child goes, yeah, you can have mine. It could be that we go, wow, now he doesn't have that toy and you do. What could we do about this? Now, it might be that the sibling goes, well, would you like one of these other ones? Or it could be like, what could we do to help, fix this? Like, there's many different scenarios within it. And again, I kind of hear where you're going. You're like, well, do we just go, well, you broke his, so I'm going to give him into yours. Now, the other thing too is sometimes life happens and we want to hold space for how that feels for a child. So if that was me and my family, the toy got broken, and one child now doesn't have that toy and the other child does, and I would really be saying with that child, what do you want to do to repair? What's that going to look like? And it might be that they give them that toy, they might give them another one, whatever that is. But the child over here who's had the toy broken, I would also be with that child to say, it is really disappointing, isn't it, that your toy's now broken? And I'm so sorry that happened for you, and tell me how you feel about it. Now they get to offload their feelings of how that doesn't feel fair and but I wanted that, and they get to feel the disappointment of that, which is also a really valid experience to feel, and we want to help them really know how to process that. And then we kind of, when we hopefully all come back to balance, we open it. I often will open up to the kids and go, well, what do we think we should do here? Now, we do this in our school a lot. We do this beautiful democratic problem solving when there's a fight or something going on. We listen to everyone's feelings about it, and then we go, how could we all get our needs met here? Now, sometimes children come up with way better scenarios than what we do, right? And a child might be like, actually, I'm going to build this, this, and this for you, and I want you to have that. And then that child's like, wow, that's even better than the toy that got broken, right? Or perhaps it's like, actually, I don't even really care about that toy, but could I play with that instead? I don't know. You don't know, right? But here's the thing with life. I mean, as adults, if someone broke your phone, you probably, by accident, you probably wouldn't go, oh, you can have mine instead. You might say, oh, can I give you some money for it? Because we have money, but kids don't do that. And some of them must be like, oh, I need a new phone anyway. It's fine. Like, again, there's so many different scenarios that can happen in life. I don't think it's a one size fits all. And I do believe, again, that sometimes when situations like that happen with children, there are so many beautiful learning opportunities within it. For that child whose toy got broken, it's a beautiful opportunity to experience disappointment and how we process that, right? And for the child that broke the toy, it's a beautiful experience for them to understand, that what it is to take accountability for doing something. Is there something they want to give? Like, again, there's no kind of black and white rule around it. Sometimes I really do hand it over to the children to go, well, how could we all get our needs met here? And they come up with scenarios that I could never even have thought of, right? And I'm like, how beautiful. Like, this is life and this is learning and growing. And it's not always black and white, and it's messy at times.
What happens? So I get all that, and I think that would probably work most of the time. But what happens if you get the scenario where the offending child says, well, I'm going to make it up to you by giving you X. And the kid who got the toy broken says, No. I want that one.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you do when the rubber hits the road that way?
Yeah, so again, I think it's about being with the feelings that are there, right? So, I wouldn't in my world, and again, people can disagree with this. Like I say to everyone, whenever I talk about parenting, take the bits you like, throw out the bits you don't. I am not the expert on parenting. There are many different ways to do it, right? So I always invite people to go, don't take my word as gospel. Like you got to tune into what feels right for you. But if that was me in my situation, right? And the child's like, no, but I want that one kind of stuff. I would actually be with a child whose toy, got broken and actually just help them work through what disappointment feels like. Because again, sometimes we can't fix it all. I wouldn't take it from that child and go, well, you did it. Now I'm going to give that to them. Right. I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would be sitting there going, all right, what's playing out here? And again, it is often about connection and relationship to know the bigger picture of stuff. Sometimes if that child whose toy got broken, if they've got a big story around things are unfair and disappointment, then I'd be like, this is a bit of a theme for them, right? And so I'm going to really work with navigating when things don't feel good or when things don't go the way we want, and I'm going to really listen to that and help them hopefully work through that. And then also if I've got a child who's holding on to it tightly going, no, you can't have it, I'm going to be like, all right, what are we protecting here and what's going on? I think that there's many nuances to it, right? And it does depend on the children. It depends on their relationship. It depends on where you are at. I mean, there's many different scenarios within it. And I think this is why parenting is so complex because, we all have our own stories and imprints of what we believe is right or wrong. And again, I know people will be listening to this going, this lady's crazy. Kids should be punished, right? And that's okay. That's okay if you feel like that. Like I please, there's no judgment from me. I think where I always come from with parenting is that I have listened to thousands of adults and their pain and their trauma. And for me, it always comes back to the same place again. Our deep fundamental need as humans is to be seen, is to be heard, and to be deeply connected to. And life is going to happen to us, and crap things are going to happen, and things are going to go wrong, and that is part of being human. And our job is to learn how to navigate those hard things. So in that situation of that toy, yes, that is disappointing. The toy got broken, and then maybe they do want that one, maybe they don't, whatever. But there's an opportunity to process what those feelings are around it. And then, sure enough, when we process it, the child will move on pretty happily. They're not going to still be sitting there 15 years later going, "You should have given me that toy."
Well, I was thinking about my brother. And so when do you use corporal punishment in that? That's
Yeah.
good.
It's just an opportunity to discuss with them how they feel about it.
Tell me now.
Okay, so we got to this conversation to this topic by starting this with resilience, and it seems like by opening up and by creating the safe space, you are creating a foundation, right? And foundation that is then allows for a safe space, and that safe space allows for the children to be more resilient and stronger out there. One of the interesting things, aside from a number of different studies that we looked at and that we talked about, as far as a safe environment early in the childhood really produces more resilient children. Looking back in history, Grant and I both like Greek history and specifically Spartans, and Spartans were the toughest warriors of their time, but their tradition was that they stayed with the family up until they were 7. And they played, they had pets, they had toys, they had loving family before they gave their child to the school, which essentially made them into these warriors. And so it seems that even without the psychology studies, they kind of innately figured out the fact that those strong warriors needed to cry and come to their parents and play with soft toys early in the childhood in order to become the hardened soldiers that we know as Spartans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it seems somewhat counterintuitive, but certainly seems to play out in history that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you need that safe space to come back to and
Yeah.
to feel nurtured.
To take off your armor.
100%. I mean, again, in working with adults, when we look at what trauma is and what sits there, if there has been an adult I'm working with that, just was like, I never felt seen by my parent, or I was always criticized, or I was never good enough, or all that kind of stuff. And I say to them, even as a 35-year-old, like, what would you want to hear right now from your parent? They come back to saying the same thing. I would love to hear the words that you are enough just the way you are. And I love and accept all of you, or all of those kind of things. We are never, and again, I see this all the time, no matter how old you are, those wounds that we can have from childhood, often we're still looking to repair them or wanting them to be healed or fixed. And it often comes back to that that nurturing environment right in the beginning to be held and loved. And we know, and I see this in my school as well, the children that are in the most supportive environments, or the ones that often thrive, are the kids that feel deeply seen and heard. They are, accepted for who they are. There is a lot of love and laughter and play in that family. That beautiful core unit is actually held. And again, as you talk about, I see that about making warriors, and that's not necessarily our job these days, is to make warriors, which is a good thing, right? I mean, we do sometimes just be in the corporate world. You need to be a warrior, right? But I think the thing to understand too is that when we are looking at wanting to, raise really healthy children who are going to make a difference in the world, we want them to stay connected to themselves, and we want them to, not necessarily hand over their power or not have boundaries or that kind of stuff. We want them to have a really strong sense of self, and that strong sense of self comes from feeling seen and heard and loved deeply. And, it's the perfect balance is boundaries, loving boundaries, and lots of love and connection. Right? And that we sit in the middle, feeling that, knowing that we're enough, then we will often trust ourselves as we move into the world.
And it's a beautiful thing to think of safety, and as a parent, your responsibility is to provide that safety, emotional and physical. What do you think of those that take it to heart and really, really run with it and become the helicopter parents? Where do you allow for that break?
Yeah. So sometimes the helicopter parenting is actually really about control on the parent's behalf. And often you will see kids push back on that. So that helicopter parent can often come in with a story that goes, I'm never going to do it the way my parent did, right? So I'm going to be at every sports practice, and I'm going to make sure they do this. And I don't want them to, get hurt or anything like that. And often that is their own fear, and often that is their own wounding that is kind of turning up in that way. So, we need to let our kids take risks, and we need to let our kids mess up. It's a really important part of learning to develop resilience, right? And so I often find that if there is a parent that is doing that a lot, that it's often very much about them and about just wanting to control, and it always comes from a loving place. It comes from a place of, I just want my child to be all right, or I just need them to be a success, or I just need them to, be the smartest or the fastest or the prettiest or whatever it is, right? Because it's usually a reflection on them. If you are these things, then I'm okay. Right. And that's actually what we don't want. When we're like, hey, and this is the trickiest part. It's okay for our kids to be mediocre, right? It is. And it's actually important for them to know you can be mediocre, and you can also be brilliant, and you also can be mediocre. And that is also lovable.
Yeah. I have so many more questions, but I think we have to let her go.
Yeah, we're looking at the
Lael,
time.
I know we have
been
pages and pages, but
We'll have to do part 2.
yes.
Well,
No,
to be fair, the reality is that, so here's what we have, just so you know. Here's what we have, right? And
we got
here's what we got.
Yes. There was that one, but there was, it's
great.
really enlightening, and I
Yes.
really, it gave me a lot to think about, because I think, look, we have such a results-oriented society, right? And I think we all recognize that, and we don't want that, and yet, we also don't. I'll speak for myself. I think there's a balance that we're all that I'm trying to strive for, between making sure that children have purpose and that they want to achieve excellence, and yet making sure they know that they're loved, whether, no matter where they land, right? But that you have a sense that they are going to be happier if they have some kind of burning fire for something. You don't want to, you can't direct exactly where they're going to want that outlet, but so it's a real tension, because you want them to feel always loved and nurtured, and you also want them to feel driven and purposeful.
Yes. And here's the thing, you're so true. What we want for our kids is to live a meaningful life,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
Except the problem is what we think is a meaningful life may
Right.
be different to what they think.
Right. But we
And
know that meaningful is important.
yeah, I really, it's, I love watching this with my adult kids because my son was always an athlete, right? And played a high level of soccer here in Australia and did brilliantly. But like a lot of kids around 17 or 18 went, ooh, this is too much, like I'm out,
Yeah.
right? And we were like, okay, we just want you to love the game and doing so. He kind of opted out. And then he kind of wandered around a bit going, well, what is it? What do I want to be? All that kind of stuff. And then he really found his deep love, which is rock climbing and bouldering. He would happily live in the forest and just climb rocks. Right? It's his absolute, I mean, nothing lights him up more than being in nature, being present, learning, and he's still that athlete. He takes incredible care of his body. And now what he's doing is he's learning how to turn that into a business, how to guide others. And again, I never foresaw that when he was younger. I thought, oh, we're going the soccer path. He's doing this. He's had to find it himself. And again, he is one of the most content, 23-year-olds I've ever met because he's like, this doesn't look conventional to everyone else, but God, this makes me happy. I'm creating a business out of this.
That's
I'm
beautiful.
like, that's what we want, right?
Right.
We want him to feel not the pressure of I must be this or have anxiety every morning or, need to take medication just to get out the door. He's just like, I am living what is my best life. I'm earning money. I'm a responsible citizen. He works with kids with disabilities, like beautiful stuff in
That's
his
beautiful.
own way, right? And I go, that's ideally what we want, right? It can look different to what we think and perceive it should be. And I think that is the challenge, is to see the child in front of us with that vision of, I want you to have your best life.
Yes.
Whatever that looks like for
The
you.
fear is driftless. The fear is, oh, what a lovely kid who really seems like I'm sure he had a loving home. He has no idea he just sits on the couch. He doesn't know what he wants to do. And that's the scary part, right? Because that's what
it is. But here's the thing of the expectation that we're still in this paradigm that says, at 18, you should know what you want to do for the rest of your life, right? Like it does my head in when kids say to kids, when we say to children at 16, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, I don't know, just be a human.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what would it look like if we changed all that pressure to say, hey, up until the age of 25, all you are meant to do is try a whole lot of things. You are meant to wander around. You are meant to travel. You're meant to work in hospitality for a bit, because I think everyone should work in hospitality. So then they're kind to hospitality stuff. You should do this. You should do, you should do it all to see what feels a yes for you. And then you can go, hey, now I'm going to go study this, or now I want to volunteer my time here. Because I think if we took the pressure off this knowing and this success and this, like, you must get a degree and then you've got to buy your first house and then you've got to get a car and then this treadmill that we get thrown onto is, we know in our it's not working. Like, think of the rate of mental health issues. Think of the stress you guys would see in people's bodies. We know it's not working. How could we do it differently?
Yeah.
Right. And for me, I think if we took that pressure off and went, hey, these first part of your life is about exploring. It's about figuring out who you are. It's about trying lots of different things. It's about really being able to tune into yourself to go, what kind of human do I want to be in the world? Right?
Yeah.
I
And that's the
we would
important thing. You have to
very
do
different
things
outcomes.
to figure that out. You can't just sit there and wait for the
Contemplate.
thunderbolt to hit you. You have to be out there doing stuff.
You've got to get out there.
Yeah.
It takes action. You can't just sit there and sit playing at home video games and waiting for someone to knock on your door and say, oh, we think it's a good idea if you become a dentist.
Right.
You have to get out there and do it. But I think when we take the pressure off and say, hey, go wander for a bit.
Yeah.
Try these jobs. Work in a record store. Maybe you love music. Go work in a bottle shop. Like, whatever. Like, find what it is that feels a good yes for you, because we see it with many adults. They get to their 30s and change jobs or are reinventing themselves at 50. I mean, I think the research says that we will have many different careers in our lives as we grow, so I think it's important that we stay open to it. We don't have this kind of like, this is what it must be, so that we give, again, children the possibility to explore, what is possible in their world.
100%. And the most successful entrepreneurs are usually 40 to 50 years old,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
kind of
Totally.
counterintuitive.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so
Lael.
much. We really appreciate you taking the time. That was a lot of
My
fun.
pleasure.
Friends, thank you for your attention. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you find value, Please remember to hit the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notifications so you can stay up to date with everything going on with the channel. And please leave us a comment, let us know what you thought about the show and also what you'd like to hear about in the future.